Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. The current videos that I'm releasing are a bit of a series. We do our grocery shopping every 6 weeks and try and be somewhat sustainable the rest of the time. And after those 6 weeks, I do a week or 10 days worth of videos daily, if I can manage it, of what I do to get that food into the freezer, the fridge, into jars, on the shelf, whatever is required to make that food last and not go to waste because we're going to use it over a 6-week period. So today's video, we are using up some more zucchini. So we got a box of zucchini from a hamper. So we use the other half of the zucchini. We're still working on tomatoes. That's a bit of an ongoing process, but we made zucchini bread with some of the zucchini and some of it went in the freezer. I also made ginger cordial because we were short on some cordial, which we use with our soda stream. So we have a soda stream machine that is hooked up to a 6.5 kilo gas bottle so that we don't have to replace it very often. Well, we don't replace it, we get it filled, but you know what I mean. So that's hooked up and we use that, and I generally have one of those with dinner most nights because I drink a lot of water, but it's nice to have something flavored with dinner, and if it has a little bit of bubbles, then all to the better. So we did that today. I can't think of what else, but that was the main things. So continue watching if you want to see, and if you haven't subscribed, it'd be great if you did, and I will see you again probably tomorrow. It is Friday today, so I will do my normal homestead garden update chat at some point tomorrow or the next day as well, and we have some garden work that we're still getting done too, so I will update that as well. But for today, food. See you later, guys. So we started off the day with flatbreads. Now I keep on meaning to do a beginning start to finish video on my flatbreads because these are sourdough and I get asked all the time and I keep on forgetting. I need to make sure I do that for you guys. Sorry about that. I will get there. So we started off the day with flatbreads. These are an overnight rise dough, so I let it sit inside at the moment because it's too cold out on the bench, and I let it sit all night and proof, and then in the morning I just pull it out of the bowl and use it. Anything that doesn't get used gets put back in the fridge, and it's good to use for more flatbreads either for dinner or the next day for breakfast. You can get a couple of days out of it before it gets a little too sloppy to shape, but even then when it's sloppy you can just pour it into a pan and cook it. It's just going to be quite tangy and depends on whether you tolerate that or not. I always weigh out my flatbread dough. I get given a little bit of crap over the fact that I weigh everything, but for my size family, having things portion controlled is really important. So by weighing out these balls, I know exactly how many flatbreads I'm going to get out of these batches of dough. So I weigh them out to about 60 to 70 gram balls. I'm not precise about it, they just have to be around about that. If you oil the balls once you've got them all made and put a tea towel over it or whatever, it'll stop them creating a skin, which makes it harder to roll them out. So I oil those and then I roll them out. Now, obviously, I can roll things into circles. I'm sure you've seen me do it before, and I have done it before. But most of the time, I really don't care. The kids don't care, so it's fairly irrelevant. So I did not roll these into circles. I just rolled them however the dough tend to just, go. A bit like, ink blot paintings or something. I fry them off in the cast iron pan. Now there's a few different ways you can fry them off. So you notice when I rolled them out, I didn't use any flour, I just used a bit of oil. If you use flour, they're more tortilla-like than using the oil. By using the oil, it will crisp up the outside a little bit. So if you want them sort of crispy, or like have a crisp outer layer, then you need to use some oil. So we use a little bit of lard in the pan when we're cooking them like this, and that will make them almost, it depends on how bad I am at timing it. Sometimes they could be almost taco-like, and sometimes they have that crisp outside, soft inside. The more oil you use, the different texture it has. So like I can use these to make a little bit like a langos dough. So I make a langos dough, but it has mashed potato in it, and it's fried in like a half an inch of oil, or fat or lard or whatever, and it has this big puffy top on it, and it's crispy with moist and fluffy on the inside. The more fat you use, the more it'll do that, because you're frying the bread. Langos is like a Hungarian fry bread. If you flour it and you don't use any oil in your pan, then it's going to be softer, more like a tortilla. So it really depends on what texture you want as to whether you oil those pans. No oil will give you a softer tortilla-like texture. Oil will start it crispy, and if you forget about it when there's no oil, you will have little circles of burn and it will be quite crunchy. But you can cover it with a tea towel like you do tortillas to steam them so that they stay soft. It's personal preference. So I made enough for everyone. So one of those things, again, that I make a dozen of them, so the kids have 2 each, and then I make Darryl's and mine as well. So while I was doing that, I cooked off more of the marinated chicken, and then I diced it all up to make it go further. We had lettuce from groceries, and we had tomatoes from the hamper, so we sliced all that up as well, and I made a batch of duck egg mayo. So we had lettuce, tomato, duck egg mayo, and chicken on these flatbreads for lunch. Well, it was Darryl and my breakfast. We do these very regularly when we, in summer, we do fruit and stuff, sorry, not fruit, like tomatoes and lettuce and spinach or silver beet or whatever out of the garden with some sort of a meat. Normally we have pickled coleslaw, things like that. And this is a very regular lunch during summer. It's nice and light, but filling, and it's fairly quick to do. I then cut up another lot of tomatoes. So each day I've been doing trays of tomatoes until I get it all done within sort of a 3 or 4 day period, so that then I can turn it into the pasta sauce. So I did another full 3 trays of tomatoes here. I cook these in the barbecue at about 150, so fairly low, because you want them to cook without burning to the trays, because it's just nasty to clean that up. And then so you want them to cook and colour on the top, but not burn to the trays or anything like that. So 150 odd for a couple of hours these cook for in the barbecue. While they were going, we had the rest of the zucchini left to go. So I'd used that zucchini for the fritters, and now I had the other half a box of zucchini. So I grated everything that was left because it was starting to get some spots on it, so it was better just to grate it all. And then I made zucchini bread. So the kids really like zucchini bread. I make it a lot in summer when we have huge amounts of zucchini. So I decided to make some this time. Now my zucchini bread is pretty thrown together, as most of my recipes are, and I use around about 450 grams of zucchini with around about 180 grams of fat, whether it's butter or oil, or I used coconut oil in this one. Around about 400 grams of flour. I use a bit of bicarb and baking soda, and then I add quite a significant amount of cinnamon, because we really like cinnamon. About a cup of sugar and 2 eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Now, I think I could bump the eggs up in this a little bit, so I'm going to try next time using 3 eggs on this one. And then I use about 100 to 150 grams of choc chips or nuts or whatever I want to add to your mix-ins as well. So that's my zucchini bread. I used the Kmart liner for the loaf pans again. I'm really loving these. These are really good. I'll try and put a link to them to buy them online. They might, and if anyone has a source for them elsewhere so that I don't have to buy the sets from Kmart, that would be great. Though, mind you, they're probably 3 times the price. I made 2 of these loaves because one never goes particularly far when you have 6 children, and then baked them both. Once the tomatoes were finished, I baked them both, and we had them later. I bagged up the rest of the zucchini that was left because I didn't have time to make another 2 loaves. But it takes about 50 minutes for those to cook. Then by the time they came out and I put more into the barbecue, I would have run out of time. Otherwise, I could have just made another 2 loaves and stuck them in the freezer. But instead, I just put the zucchini in the freezer, and it can be used straight from the freezer to bake more zucchini bread or to put in soups or anything. So it's fine. It goes in the freezer. I reuse the Ziploc bags. I tend to label on them what's been in them. They go back in the freezer once I empty them, and then I refill them with the same product for anyone who's curious about that. After all that, I also needed to make some more cordial. So Darryl and I are sort of out of cordial at the moment. We really like to have our SodaStream water with a bit of cordial with dinner. So I had ginger. So I was making a ginger lemon cordial this time. I had about 500 grams of ginger there, and I used the Thermomix to mince it up into small pieces. The smaller it is, the more surface area, the more flavour you will theoretically get from it in your cordial. Then I added sugar. So I'm pretty sure this is based on a Sally Wise recipe, and it's quite high in sugar, but we have tried reducing it, and there's a little bit of an issue with the heat of the ginger if you don't have enough sugar to compensate for it. And whilst we like the heat to a degree, it's a little overwhelming if you don't have a significant amount of sugar in it. So I think the recipe here calls for 3.6 kilos of sugar. I think I used a 3 kilo bag. I'm pretty sure that's what I used. So I just used 1 bag of sugar. Now, it makes a large batch. So it's 5.5 litres of water that go into that quantity as well. And then you need to add citric acid to it as well. I'm a little low on citric acid, so I added what was left in my jar, and I'll just be aware that there wasn't quite as much citric acid in it as there possibly should be. So I will keep an eye on the jars. But our cordial doesn't tend to stay on the shelves for very long anyway, especially if I'm lazy and I'm only making one type at a time. We will just drink through the one type and then I'll make another one. If we have a variety of them, then that makes a bit of a difference, I suppose. So I bring that to a simmer and make sure that it's all heated up through, the sugar is dissolved and things like that. Then I add lemon juice to it. So you can use lemon or lime. We've used both. They're both lovely. This is not homegrown, but home purchased and then squeezed lemon juice that I have frozen in ice cubes. And you want about 625 grams of lemon juice, or mils, so I just go in weights, to add to it. So I added that into the mix and just let them dissolve. So kept the heat on while that dissolved, and then when it just slightly started bubbling again, I turned it off and put a lid on it and let it steep. So you can let it steep for as long as you want. Depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I end up leaving it overnight because I just haven't got time to can it until the next day. And then I normally strain it, warm it up, and then put it in the jars if that's what I'm going to do. This particular time, I only left it for a couple of hours because I had time to do it, which means I didn't really need to reheat it. So I strain, when I do this for canning, the ginger can leave a lot of sediment in the jar, and a bit like the whole not enough sugar, it can be a little overpowering. The amount of sediment in there can create the heat of the ginger to be just less pleasant and more medicinal, I suppose, which, hey, you know, that has its purpose, but for us, that's not what we're looking for. So I strain it through a coarse colander first, and then once I get the larger pieces out, I then strain it through a fine strainer. So this particular time I'm using one of these flour sack tea towels that I keep on raving about, that I just use for everything and really love, and someone mentioned that I haven't got a link for in the bottom. I'll have to fix that. So I strained it through the fabric as well. It's a little time consuming, but it does pull out some of that smaller sediment. It will not get rid of all the sediment. You still will have some sediment in the bottom of the jar, and it is up to you whether you then shake the jar before serving, or Darryl tends to just pour off the top gently and leaves the little bit with the sediment in the bottom. So personal preference there. You'll have to adjust that for taste wise. So I ended up filling all my jars. I got 7 litres plus a bit extra that I stuck in the fridge for use in the next day or so. I used white vinegar to clean the rims, and then I added new lids. So these are reused ghee jars, as you can see by the labels, because I'm lazy and I don't take labels off until they fall off. They're with new lids, and these are 82mm lids that fit these 1 litre jars. And then I put them in the steam canner because it was the easiest thing to do for me today. So all 7 jars fit in the steam canner. You can fit 7 quarts in the steam canner. And I did it for 20 minutes once it was in the dark green, which is the highest setting, because that's what I need for my altitude. So you have to check what setting you need for your altitude, but we need to be in the dark green. So once it hits the dark green, then I started 20 minutes canning time. Once it was finished, I let it sit for a little bit like you do with anything, took the lid off, and then put the jars aside for 24 hours to cool, tested the lids and all that sort of thing. I also had to puree up the roasted tomatoes, so I just did that like I've shown in a previous video. Just pour it all into the Thermomix and puree up the whole lot, and then put it in a container to go with the other stuff that's in the fridge. My fridge is really full at the moment, by the way. I also chose to skin a tray because I'm going to make roasted tomato soup for dinner in the next couple of nights. So one of the trays, I pulled all the skins off like I showed how easy it was before, and put the flesh into the Thermomix and pureed that, but put it in a separate position for that was different to where the other stuff was. I put all the skins that I had peeled off into the dehydrator, and I will turn that into tomato powder to use to thicken up things and for flavouring and stuff like that, which is something that I do if I have a peel the tomatoes. Not that I peel tomatoes very often, but if I do, then I make sure to dehydrate the skins. The kids had leftover fritters for dinner with some more chicken and things like that, whatever else they pulled out of the fridge. So they had some of the zucchini bread for dessert. So I just thought I'd catch a clip of it cutting. It's still hot, and the zucchini bread does not slice very well when it's hot. It's quite crumbly, but when it cools, it slices into really nice slices. So I'm happy with this recipe because even though it looks like a little bit of a mess when I'm cutting it here, when it's cool, it slices up really nicely. But I think I will try adding an extra egg and see if that helps a little bit with the texture. But the kids really enjoy it, and it's a good use of zucchini. So that was their dessert today. Thank you for joining me again today, and I think this video is going up a little bit later than normal because the morning has been a bit hectic, but I should see you again tomorrow with another video. Thanks, guys.